American prophets, in case there's anybody out there that thinks that I'm prejudiced and I want to take a one-sided stand and refight the Civil War, God forbid. I think it was one of the most horrible things. It was a terrible punishment. The scope of it and the like is beyond my understanding. But I guess when the Eternal could let King David make a choice. See, David of the Old Testament, he violated a law which would seem to us very insignificant, but there was a law given to Israel, if you want to do a little research, the Semitic people, the descendants of Adam, that they were to trust the Eternal. They were not to trust in might, like the scripture of the New Testament is that, not by might, not by power, but by me, saith the Eternal. So David, as he had neglected the Eternal, he neglected the ark. Remember, he messed up quite a bit. No man sinned like David, granted, but no man repented like David. But there is a book of examples there. He decided that he would go and he would count Israel. But one of God's prophets, he came to David and said, hey, this is a super bozo no-no. You do not do this. And David sitting on the throne, knowing that he was the highest ranking man in the land, thinking he was God's appointed, anointed, he was his little honey, and he could just about do what he wanted and get away with it. Not so. We find that after taking the census, then the Eternal spoke through his prophet, and who was sent to David, and said, now look, God is going to have you pay. You're going to have a lot of people die either through famine, through pestilence, or through war. Take your choice. David says, well, let's get it over with quick. I'll let them die in battle. So you see what your rulers in effect do to you? All right, I may be wrong, forgive me, but I think it was 75,000 men died as the result of the error of their leader. And he learned a terrible lesson. But a lot of people and a very small ocean of blood was spilled. And so this is why I would never take a stand any longer on the war between the North and the South. That was our divided nation. And if it were to happen today, I don't care who I offend and who said I don't want any more of your tapes. I would go to Canada or Australia. I'd go to some other country. Even if I had to go hide in a swamp. You couldn't talk me into going and killing my neighbor for some lousy, greedy bunch of politicians and a bunch of merchants. I just would not do it. Now, what we're going to deal with to show that we want to be fair and show that God had men on both sides. Can you see what a horrible... Try to imagine this. Here, we're going to speak about this General Mcchellan, who was a Yankee on the northern side. He was a God-fearing, prayerful man. Remember, on the north and the south, you had their officers, the chaplains. They were all praying to the same eternal Almighty to spare them and to help them have victory. How would you like to be the Eternal sitting there hearing the prayers of both sides? Can you imagine what a sad, sad position and what horror that we put our Father in, the sadness it must give him while we, it takes us millenniums, and it doesn't seem like we ever learn. But anyway, so much for my pontificating. I want to go back and give credit to a man who was a great patriot. I didn't agree with all of his views, but I've met very few men or women in my life that I did. And if I started to do that, I'd be a little nervous. But there was a man by the name of William Caldron who lived in Atascadero, California. And he was putting out material as far back as 1935. He died somewhere up in the late 60s. I never met the man, but many years ago I bought his library out with another acquaintance of mine who got in there first and got the best books, and I kind of got the leftovers, and I believe I was the dude that paid for the bulk of all of it, but that's neither here nor there. But he put it out in his little booklet back then for 10 cents. It was called the Beacon Light Broadcast, and he admitted that he got it from another outfit on the East Coast called Destiny Publishers. And there have been several magazines and booklets of different people that I could quote, but I would suspect that most of them came from either one or both of these men who were on the same track, and they were friendly rivals, but they disagreed on quite a number of points. But in other words, there are records of other visions and of these American prophets that are almost identical to that of Washington, as we have shared that with you. And their great importance, probably one of the best known, are this prophecy of this man. Well, there was another one too, by the way, Elder Joseph Hoag, H-O-A-G, and then there was General George B. Mcchellan. As I said, he was a Northern general, quite famous, and every person in the United States, citizen or otherwise, who had the welfare of his country at heart, or who is even interested in maintaining our present civilization, they really should read and reread his prophecies. I want you to know that personally I'm interested in America because I've been convinced, for as I've told many of you, nearly 30 years, that the Almighty has ordained America to be the advance guard of the civilization in the world today, and that he has ordained America as a beacon light, as this man put it back in 1934. And many of you have heard me say that, well, whether you like it or not, I don't care if you're foreign to my great nation, which I was born in and have pride in. I want you to know, whether you like it or not, you have stepped into the new and unwalled Jerusalem, Jerusalem. It's right there in the middle. And I tell folks it stands for the United Sons of Abraham, those that the preachers have told us have been lost. No, no, no. Israel never got lost. The other 10 tribes or 11 tribes or 12 tribes. There was a Jewish gentleman who put out a book that was entitled The 13th Tribe. Well, he was murdered because he put out the truth. But anyway, this is the new and unwalled Jerusalem, and it also, there's prophecies that go along with that, and it talks about all of the great heathen nations of the world in the very hour, I believe, that we're living in. I'm speaking of just the next few years, that there is going to be a great attack from several points and direction. I won't go into the detail, but we're going to get into those prophecies as we get on down the road here. But now, if you're living in Canada, if you're living in Australia, I don't care where you're living, you're going to take part of that judgment. Just like Germany. You know, the terrible, terrible punishment that we've seen the people of that nation go through. And I believe that the predominance of those people were wayward Judah. My. You know, go ahead and talk about Hitler one way or the other and the people and the war, but I don't care about that. You know, years from now, is it going to be our fault because of what Bush and our vice president and our Congress and all of those clowns in Washington that have sold us out to a one-world government and got us into no-end wars with our adversaries? Hey, we've sinned. We have really sinned, my friends, as a nation. I think worse than Germany ever did. And I think that we may pay the same horrible, horrible price. If I'm right, it talks about those who are left alive. Now, I want you to go back and you listen to that a prophecy of Washington. I hope and pray that you will listen to it again. And those, my friends, in South Africa, and Australia, and Canada, he's going to deal with you too. He says, I chastise those whom I love, but I hope that you will read these things and it will give you understanding and peace in your heart. And remember the 91st Psalms. You see, our brethren, they're going to get the switch. He said 1,000 fall to your right and 10,000 fall to your left, but no harm shall come nigh thee. Who's he talking to? He's talking about his believers. And the New Testament, the Revelations, that talks about some people that are sealed in their forehead. Yes, yes. The adversary is sealing the world and their forehead. That in their mind, soul, psyche, that's where they are, psycho, that their hand may carry out the bidding of their soul as they are sealed. But you, my friends, hey, I'm not going to go in. I know you've probably been burned out, any of you who've been in the church world, where it talks about all of creation as groaning and travail. Hey, that's the trees, the birds, the whales, the foxes, the coyotes, everything in nation, our rivers, and every bit of life from the most minute amoeba to the fleas, to the redwood trees, to the bees, whatever. They are waiting for a manifestation of some sons of the eternal offspring who have in their genetical pattern something at a certain hour. Now, when the eternal, through what is referred to and misunderstood and never clearly understood, I don't believe any of us who are able to conceive or understanding when the anointing of the Holy Spirit of the eternal Creator takes over and mashes your DNA button, and you shall react. And he talks about an hour when I will again bring to your remembrance. Now, if you're following some Ganabi, Harishi, Yakshirmai, and you're sitting there in a towel and a hanky on your head and you're contemplating the belly button fuzz, I'm sorry, honey. There ain't nothing going to be called back to your memory because you put nothing in there to recall. It's just like a computer. If you don't feed anything into it, you don't get anything out of it. But these things that I want to share with you, that as the hour gets darker, that you might have more understanding, more faith to call on. And yes, Washington told you about in the final dreadful hour when it seems so very dark and without any hope at all. He talks about the great light that shall come from outer space as he comes with his great heavenly host and his armies to intercede and to protect his chosen, his little flock. O little flock, it's your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. But now let's go back to this General George B. Mcchellan. As I say, every person in the United States, any citizen of this nation, he should find out who he was and find that this is the foundation of our philosophy as far as America is concerned. I'm not interested in where you were born or how. The only thing that should interest you is, do you agree with the Eternal's platform? If so, let us join hands and prepare for the last great trial of these United States. Even before I was familiar with the visions of these, what I call the American prophets, I saw the picture clearly from the standpoint of deduction and logic that the day would surely come when the old world forces would make a concerted attack against these United States, and they would strive to tear us down from our pedestal. I do not believe they will succeed, for the Eternal has ordained it. Otherwise, he wrote it in Ezekiel and throughout the Scriptures. He said so, and that's good enough for me. But I do believe that with a program of preparation, we can lessen the struggle considerably. There's no doubt in my mind that we're going to have to repel invaders from our borders. And for a while, Canada is friendly and a neighbor and our brother. They're going to be with us in this great struggle. but she's not strong enough to stand up against all of the armies of the world, which are going to pour through her country from the north. We're talking about prophecies of Ezekiel and all, and we're not going to go into them at this point. As we have many times stated, the greatest struggle of all time between the forces of darkness and the force of light soon will plunge every country in this world into mortal combat. Now, like this man that I spoke of, this Mr. Pilgrim, these people knew and gave him insight. They had the spiritual capacity to look down the quarter, even though they believed that they were of that generation. They could not participate in it. And it reminds me very much of Moses, where the Eternal allowed him to see Canaan land, but said he would not enter into it, at least not at that time. So today, as I say, we're in the beginning of a struggle that I believe is very close at hand, probably a matter of months, 36 months in 3 years. It could be less, it could be more, because Russia is now blackmailing us to send them billions of tons of food and medical supplies and provisions, because you have to remember, we've had Russians who deserted and came to this country, but they found out that they were expected to work for a living, and so they decided to go back home. They liked this communism where they had the welfare and all their medical, everything was supplied for them, and somebody told them what to do with every day of their working life. And so, unfortunately, they have a whole nations full of people over there that are like that. They're lost. And this is the hour that was prophesied by Ezekiel, where the Almighty said he was putting a hook in their Satan's jaw, those who have committed treason against the governments and the commandments of the Eternal. They've followed the failing laws and statutes of Balaam from the beginning. They made a bad choice. They can't feed their people. The whole change in the weather plan pattern has changed in the trade winds. And here they are. They have nations of going into millions of people that are going to go hungry. And the only way we can keep them off our back is to feed them. And when we can no longer feed them, even though they have taken us with their idiotic ideology that they claim they've given up, there are those here, right in our very government, upon all levels, that have sold us out to this one world religion, one world government. We all gather together in mutual respect and human dignity and clasp hands around the world, and we get all teary-eyed. Well, anyway, the beginning of this struggle, I believe, is so very close at hand that it's only going to be a question of years, if not months, and America is going to be in a time of trouble and a struggle such as we have never known. And the only thing that you can do then is trust in the Eternal, I would say, and using the old adage of some of our heroes of yesteryear, that our younger people have not been taught, and keep your powder dry. As we find that these atheistic forces that are active throughout the world today, they're just as deadly as an armed force. And from all of the armaments of the world, could not protect her if she became a godless nation. We're talking about our nation. Of that, I'm surely convinced that the first part of our motto means that as a nation we should go back to Christian fundamentals, and we shouldn't quibble all over these little theological differences. And the point is, we either believe in the Eternal or we don't. We're either going to obey him or we're not. No two of us have the same mental conception of the Eternal anyway. That doesn't really make a lot of difference. Let us adopt a platform that all professing Christians that can subscribe to. Let's let each other have his own private interpretation. What difference does it make? I'm going to give you my platform in this respect. Without law, you have chaos. First, I believe that the Eternal is the supreme power of all the universe, and he says by his own mouth that he's the Father of all creation, the only power in the universe. Secondly, I believe this man of Galilee, the one they call Messiah, the one they call Yeshua, that he was the Eternal and incarnate, that he was the leader of humanity upon this planet, and this is his special dominion, as we've said before, that the earth is his footstool. He's the headmaster, principal if you like, and as it were pointed by the Almighty himself. Therefore there can be no substitute. He at all time, he's guiding, he's directing the destiny of this planet, and he's always on the lookout for you, my dear friends, that are probably listening to the sound of my voice, what I would consider you, the advanced pupils, the called out ones, what would we say, the advanced guard of civilization. After all, this is nothing more, what we're trying to say, other than Christian ethics in action. Now, the first two would imply that the brotherhood of man, eventually, if America is true to her destiny, she will bring about the brotherhood of the Semitic man. I think before we go telling the rest of the world how to live, we have to be an example to ourselves. But every day, as the Scriptures fulfill, the enemy coming into the land like a flood, that our voices get weaker and weaker. We're afraid to stand up and say, if you people are coming into our land, you're going to get under our laws and obey us. But no, we start to vote for them. We put them over us. And if they were such great success stories, why did they leave and flee their nation to come here to live with us? But before all this has happened, or can happen, and we're brought to this, I think that there has to be blood on everybody's doorstep. There's going to be a terrible carnage. I believe the old world is doomed to destruction, and those who don't die in the battlefield will perish on the oceans that rolled over them. That's now that will be going across, let's say, the continents of Europe and Canada, and this is going to be a worldwide thing. Now, it is hopeless, I believe, to expect regeneration from the present European mess over there, because they're trying to set up a system that is diametrically opposed and take the power away from us, the Western world, that they might have an economy of their own that will put ours to shame and put us to ruin. And I believe that they have these world international bankers behind them in that. Now, this whole earth is sodden and soaked with corruption and rottenness, and even here in America, the founders of America came here. They came here to get away from that old system and to find a new, and I believe that they were divinely inspired and led, and it's a part of the Eternal's great plan. But the dark forces, from the very beginning, they've tried to crush the efforts for a higher demonstration of civilization, an effort for a practical working out. They're against the teachings of Christ and Christendom, and so as up to this date, there's been two severe struggles to maintain this nation. And approximately every 84 years, this country has passed through the fire, each time purifying itself from the dross that's crept into the structure. It's symbolized, I'm often running here, and I'm afraid I'm pontificating too much. So I believe that all of our preaching and all of our teaching, it doesn't really mean too much. As I say, is going to be brought about by blood on our doorsteps. So let's go on with the vision or the dream of General Mcchellan. As it was about 2 o'clock of the third night after General McClellan's arrival in Washington to take command of the U.S. Army. He found that justly celebrated soldier was poring over his maps and reports of scouts. And as the hour came tolling through the night, together with the dull rumbling of army wagons and artillery wheels, this wearied hero pushing from him, the maps, and he leaned his forehead on his folded arm upon the table before him, and he fell into a sleep so deep that even the occasional booming of the very heavy guns being placed in the entrenchments was insufficient to disturb him. He goes on to say, "I could not have been slumbering thus more than 10 minutes," said the general to an intimate friend to whom he related this strange narration, "when I thought that the door of my room, which I had carefully locked, was suddenly thrown open, and someone strode up to me and laid a hand on my shoulder and said in a solemn voice, 'General McClellan, do you sleep on your post? Arouse you, or ere it can be prevented, the foe shall be upon Washington.' Never before in my life have I heard a voice commanding or possessing the commanding and even terrible tone of the one who addressed me those fearful words, with a sensation that passed through me as it fell upon my ears, and I instinctively shrunk into myself as the thought of my own negligence. I can only compare it to the whistling, shrieking sweep of a storm of grape shot discharged directly through my brain. I couldn't move, however, though I tried hard to raise my head from the table as a sign of my willingness to make answer to this unknown intruder. I once more heard the same slow, solemn voice repeat, "General Mcchellan, do you sleep on your post?" There was a peculiarity about it at this time. It seemed as though I were a mere atom of matter, suspended in the center of infinite space, and that the voice came from a hollow distance all around me. As the last word was uttered, I regained by some felt an unknown power, my own volition, and with the change, the grape shot discharge sensation in my brain ceased, and a strange but new one seized my heart, as if a huge rough icicle were being sawed back and forth through me. I started up, or rather imagined I did, for whether I was awake or asleep, I'm utterly unable to tell or decide. My first thought was about my maps, and before my eyelids had half opened, my hand clutched them. But this was all. The table was still before me, and everything else had disappeared. The furniture had gone. The walls of the apartment had gone. The ceiling was not to be seen, and all I saw was the tableaux that I was about to describe to you. My gaze was turned southward, and there before me was a living map. The only expression I can think of as befitting this scene, one grand view of my eye took in the whole expanse of country, the view far as the Gulf of Mexico from the Atlantic Ocean on to the east to the Mississippi River and westward. Before fixing my attention upon the immense scene, however, I thought of this mysterious visitor whose voice I had heard but a moment before, and I looked towards him. An apparition stood on my left hand, someone in front at a distance of about 6 foot from me. I sought for his features, trying to recognize him. But I was disappointed, for the statue-like figure was but a vapor. The clouds having the general outline of a man, this troubled me, and I was turning the matter over in my mind when the shadowy visitor, in the same slow, solemn voice as before, said, "General Mcchellan, your time is short. Look to the southward." I felt unable to resist the command, even if I wished to do so, and therefore my eyes turned to the living map. Out to the Atlantic I saw various vessels of the blockading squadron looming up with the most perfect distinctness in the bright moonlight as it illuminated everything with a strong but mellow light. I saw Charleston Harbor, its force with their pacing sentinels and sullen-looking barbette guns. My eyes followed the ocean line all the way along into the Gulf to the New Orleans, thence up the Mississippi and Fort Pickens, and in fact every fortification along the watery boundary I beheld with much distinction. As you see the corporal's guard passing there, this filled me with delightful surprise, and it would be utterly impossible for me to describe the ascetic amazement that followed, as within the limits that I mentioned, my eyes took in a moment or a minute but lightning-like detail of every mountain range and hill and valley and forest and meadow and river and rivulet, city, village, camp, tent, body of men, sentinels, cannon. I may say, dispensing further details, every living or dead thing, no matter what its height or bulk, my blood seemed to stop in its channels for joy, as I thought that the knowledge and thereby the advantage thus given me would ensure a speedy and happy termination of the war. The idea was engrossing my mind when once more the slow, solemn voice, "General Mcchellan, take your map and note down what you behold. Tarry not, your time is short." I started and I glanced at this unearthly speaker, and I saw him extend his arm, pointing to the southward. Still I saw no features. Something out the largest and most accurate of my maps, I seized a pencil and once more bent my gaze over the living map, and as I looked this time there was a cold, thrilling chill ran over me, and this huge, rough icicle begin its sawing motion through my heart. For his pencil in hand, I saw the masses of the enemy's fortress and forces being hurried to certain points so as to thwart movements that within a day or two I intended to make at these identical spots, which were on two particular approaches to Washington. I beheld heavy columns of the foe so posted for a concentrated attack that instantly I saw that it must succeed in its object unless speedily prevented. Treachery, treachery, cried I in despair, and as before my blood seemed to stop in its channels, ruin and defeat seemed to stare me in the face. At this fearful moment that slow, solemn voice struck me once more upon my ears. Joe Mcchellan, you have been betrayed, and had not God willed otherwise, ere the sun of tomorrow had set, the Confederate flag would have floated over your capital and your own grave. But note what you say, your time is short, tarry not. Ere the words had left the lips of my vapory mentor, my pencil was flying with the speed of thought, transferring to the map before me all that I'd seen in the living map. Some mysterious and unearthly influence was upon me, and I noted and I recorded the minute detail that I beheld without the slightest effort, delay, or mistake. And at last the task was done, and my pencil dropped before my fingers. And for a while, previous to this, however, I had been conscious that there'd been a shining light on my left that steadily increased until the moment I ceased my task. And then it became, in an instant, more intense than the noonday sun. See, there's that bright light again. Quickly I raised my eyes, and never, were I to live forever, should I forget what I saw. The dimly shadowy figure was no longer a dim shadowy figure, but the glorified refulgent of Washington, the father of his country, and now a second time its savior. My friend, it would be utterly impossible for me to attempt to describe the majesty of that returned spirit. I can only say that Washington, as I beheld him in my dream or trance, as you may choose to call it, it was the most godlike being that I've ever conceived of. Like a weak, dazzled bird, I sat gazing at this heavenly vision from the sweet and silent repose of Mount Vernon. Our Washington had risen to once more encircle and raise up his saving arm over our fallen, bleeding nation. And as I continued looking for an expression of sublime benignity came gently upon his visage, and for the last time I heard that slow, solemn voice saying something like this: Joe Mcchellan, while yet in the flesh, I beheld the birth of the American Republic. It was indeed a hard and bloody one, but God's blessings were upon the nation, and therefore through the great struggle for existence, he sustained her with his mighty hand and brought her out triumphantly. A century has not passed since then, and yet the child republic was taking her position to peer with nations whose pages of history extend for ages into the past. She, since those dark days, by the favor of God, greatly prospered, and now, by the very reason of this prosperity, she is brought to her second great struggle, this so far the most perilous ordeal she has to endure, passing as she is from childhood to openly maturity. She is called on to accomplish the vast result, self-control, to learn the important lesson, self-control, self-rule. That is the future that will place her in the vein of power and civilization. It is here that all the nations have hereto failed, and she too, the republic of the earth, had not God willed otherwise, would by tomorrow's sunset been a heap of stones cast out over the final grave of human liberty. But her cries had come up out of the borders like sweet incense unto heaven. She shall be saved. She shall peace once more be with her, and prosperity fill her with joy. But her mission will not then be finished. For ere another country shall have gone by, or another century shall have gone by, the oppressor of the whole earth, hating and envying her and her exaltation, shall join themselves together and raise up their hands against her. But if she shall be found worthy of her high calling, they shall truly be discomfited. And then will be ended her third and last struggle for existence. Henceforth shall the republic go on, increasing in goodness and power, until her borders shall end only in the remotest corner of the earth, and the whole earth shall beneath her shadowy wings become a universal republic. Let her and her prosperity, however, remember the Yahweh her God. Let her trust in him, and she shall never be confounded. The heavenly visitation ceased, speaking as I still continued gazing on him, drew near to me, and raised and placed his hands above. No sound passed his lips, but I felt a strange influence come over me, and I inclined my head to receive his blessings. The baptism of the Spirit of Washington, the first instant a peal of thunder rolled in upon me, and I awoke, and the visitor had departed, and I again was set in my apartment, with everything exactly as it was before. I fell asleep with a great expectation, and the maps on which I had dreamed I had been marking very literally covered with a net of pencil signs and figures. I arose to my feet, and I rubbed my eyes, and I looked a turn or two around the room to recover myself. I was awake, but the penciling were as plain as ever. I had before me a complete map with a repository of information, as though I had spent years in gathering and recording its details, and my mind became confused with the strange and numberless ideas and thoughts that crowded themselves into it. Involuntarily I sank to my knees to ask wisdom from on high, and as I arose refreshed in spirit, that same slow, solemn voice seemed to say to me from an infinite distance, "Your time is very short, tarry not." In an instant, thought became clear and active, and hastening out carriers with orders to be executed certain maneuvers at certain points, I threw myself into the saddle long ere daylights, and I galloped from camp to camp and post to post, and had the happiness to divert the enemy from his object, which I assure you, my friend, would have proved entirely successful by reason of the last piece of treachery, had not heaven interposed. The map is looked upon by no human eye save my own, and therefore treachery can do no harm. I have on it every whit of information that the enemy would give millions to keep from us. The fate of the war is settled. The rebellion truly seemed formidable, but it was only a struggle. The mighty toppling masses of national power and retribution will, until the proper time comes, now and then let them strip upon its victims, forerunners of its approach. But when the proper moment does come, I will sweep down upon and forever annihilate this union with thunder that will reverberate through the world for ages to come. Sir, there will be no more Bull Run affairs. God has stretched forth his hand. The American Union is saved, and our beloved and glorious Washington shall again rest sweetly in his tomb until perhaps the end of the prophetic century approaches. That is to bring the Republic to her third and final struggle, when he may once more lay in hands, or laying aside the crements of Mount Vernon, become a messenger of succor and peace, and from the great ruler who has the nations of the earth in his keeping. But the future is to rest for her own comprehension. We are but the children of the present, when peace shall have again folded her wings and settled upon our land. Then shall the strange, wonderful, unearthly map be preserved among American archives, precious reminder to the American nation of what is in her second great struggle for existence they owed to God and the glorified spirit of Washington. Now I leave that to you, my friend and listener. Hey, listen, I know how, it's not just a matter of trying to make a living today. It's a matter of survival. I know a lot of you that get these tapes. You feel you can't afford them. But I hope that it's worth it in comfort and to give you courage, and those that have less faith in you, and to know, yes, our day, our hour. I believe that the eternal has saved the best to last. I believe the worst is here too. But you see, it's like a battery, getting a car started. There's the positive and there's the negative. And the Eternal talks about a people that he will refine as pure gold. You know, I don't know, I hope I didn't in my senility here. I hope I haven't neglected. Would you forgive me if I go off on a tangent just very briefly? Go back. I'd like to talk to you about another fellow. He was not an American poet, but his name was Alfred Lord Tennyson. He was an English poet from 1809 to 1892. He was allowed to look into the future. I dipped far into the future as far as I could see. I saw the vision of the world and all the wonder that would be. I saw the heavens filled with commerce and argosies of magic sails, pilots of the purple twilight dropping down with costly veils, heard the heavens filled with shouting as there rained a ghastly dew. Emphasis added. Oh, the nation's airy naves grappling in the central blue. Far above the world-wide whispers of the south wind rushing warm, with the standards of the people plunging through the thunderstorm, till the war drums throbbing no longer, and the battle flags are furled, and the parliament of men, the federations of the world. There the common sense of most shall hold a fretful realm in awe, and the kindly world shall slumber, lapped in universal law. Now, folks, I think that this is just showing us that all prophets were not in the Bible. They were not all just on the American shores, but I believe this Tennyson, he actually used the word pilots here, and he talked about heavenly battles. And I think that also he talked about things that men put into the air, such as radioactivity. That, gosh almighty, I've got books here going back to the 50s and 60s. They were warning us about radioactivity being found in the air and the soil and the water and the plants and animals and men. And they tried to ask, how do we get rid of it? What are the symptoms? What can we do about it? Well, go to the health food stores. There's people putting books out on it. There was Linda Clark wrote, Are You Radioactive? Way back, I think that was in, maybe I should look. I think I have it here handy. I think it was back in, oh, goodness sakes. She was the one that brought that one to mind, too, that reminded me. Okay, back in 1973. But you see, people just go right back to sleep. Now, if you would forgive me, I get so many people who write to me, and they want to know, what about this and what about that, and one I'm asked about continuously. Hey, he seems to take precedent over the Bible, and I feel that I've got to talk about him for just a little bit, and then I promise we're going to go back and we're going to talk about more American prophets. And I have a lot of different people who speak to me about this Nostradamus. And a lot of them can't even pronounce or remember his name, but they've heard this and they've heard that. Now, let's stop and think, why is it that people don't search their Bible? But as I have spent a lifetime searching archives and libraries and so forth, this is one of the biggest thrills to me is browsing through a new bookstore I've never heard of or an old bookstore. To me, that's something that is really exciting. And I run across people all the time that I ask them, and I see them frustrated, and I say, can I help you out? A lot of times they're in the same section I am, and they say, well, I'm looking for this guy that prophesies the end of the world and all this and that, and they can't quite remember his name. I said, who? And then I said, are you talking about Nostradamus? Yes. So a lot of people ask me, they say, who was he? Well, he was, first of all, a lot of people aren't aware of this, but he was a revolutionary doctor. His name actually was Michael D. Nostradamus, who later on, he changed his name, what you would call Latinized it. He changed it to Nostradamus. He was born in 1503 in Saint Remy, the Providence of France. His family were Jewish, but they converted to Christianity, and the young Michael, he was brought up a Catholic. Hey, he was a super student in school, and he became famous as a skilled physician. A lot of people aren't aware of this, and especially dealing with the plague victims. And many of his successes in the field were undoubtedly they were due to he was revolutionary. Where does time go when you're having fun? Once again, I want to apologize by not warning you the tape was running out, but seeing as Nostradamus, he was quite a free thinker. A lot of people aren't aware of where we got our barber poles. Even in this country here, up till I think about a century ago, you go to a barber and you tell him how you're feeling peaked and run down, and he said, well, you probably got some bad blood left over from winter, whatever. They cut you with a razor and actually bleed you. Or they had these jars of leeches. They'd reach in there and they'd pick out a few dandies and they'd put them on you to suck your blood out. Now you talk about something unsanitary. But anyway, even back Nostradamus, he did not revert to the old bleeding theory. And by the way, I didn't make my point there. These barbers, they used to lay the bloody rags out over the railing there where you tied your horses up. So that's actually where the striped pole came from. And eventually out in front of the barber shops, they'd have this, what we thought looked like a candied pole that was red and white. But it all started with the laying out the bloody rags, bleeding people. But anyway, Nostradamus, he was one of those revolutionary thinkers, and he didn't believe in that, and he did away with it. In other words, he was really ahead of his time, and he made a lot of really wild statements that the earth circled the sun. But they weren't able to, or man didn't discover this till 100 years after his death. Did they find out that he was right? And they said that he had this prophetic gift that came to light around 1555, after he was about 52 years old, when he published the first of 10 books, and all of them were entitled Centuries. Each volume contained 100 predictions, all of which were written in verse form. Now, he never tried to make any secret about his technique for looking into the future. He told everybody straight out. He placed a bowl of water on a brass tripod and he gazed into it, very much the same way of these people that use crystal balls today and intently study the crystal ball. But anyway, occasionally his predictions came to him, and what he claimed were like a spontaneity, a flash, you might call it an institution. One day when he was a young man traveling to Italy, he fell on his knees before a passing monk named, see if I remember right, Felice Piretti. And to the astonishment of this monk and his onlookers around there, Nostradamus declared, I kneel before His Holiness. And in 1585, that monk became Pope Sextus V. And once when he was visited by Catherine de Medici, he was intrigued by a boy in her entourage proclaiming that one day he would be King of France. And the boy, he became Henry of Navarre. And he became Henry the Fourth. But, there was a lot of people that, down through the ages, they tried to take advantages, process, and so a lot of people aren't aware of this, but back in the autumn of 1939, you remember in that period when Adolf Hitler, he was coming to the height of his power, and he was in the midst of unleashing war, as they said, on the world. We found that the wife of his minister of propaganda, who was Joseph Goebbels, she ran across some of this about Nostradamus. Now, what puzzles me, if as much as they were down on the Jews, if she knew that this Nostradamus, and if the rest of the country knew that he was a Jew, would they have really used it? But anyway, it was the wife of Goebel. She had drew attention to this remarkable set of prophecies that were made 400 years prior to them, and all they knew, they were written by a Frenchman by the name of Nostradamus, and he seemed to predict the rise of Hitler. He claimed that even coming near to mention him by name, when he referred supposedly to a fellow in the future, a German leader, that was to be called Heister, Hister, instead of Hitler. Unfortunately for Hitler, even the most skilled interpretation of that prophecy could not predict the success of the Third Reich. So the propaganda ministry, what they did, they composed what a lot of people, this is a claim of the world, and hey, I'll just leave it for you to decide, but the propaganda ministry, they composed fake verses, and in 1940, the Luftwaffe, they dropped thousands of Nostradamus leaflets over France and Belgium, announcing that Germany would be victorious and prophesying that southern France would be spared in the conflict. Now, their whole idea behind this, they were trying to ensure the people who had become refugees that they were not to choke the roads leading to Paris and the Channel ports. So in retaliation, then the British intelligence, they come up with a plan of their own, and they made up some Nostradamus writings. And these, of course, predicted an outright Allied victory over the Axis. So, you see, when we have all of this hoorah, and at each side, they're all meddling with this, trying to get it to their advantage, you do have to forgive me if I become a doubting Thomas. Because even among pseudo-Christendom, those claiming to be Christians, and even in our day and age, we've seen a lot of these electronic Christians that get up there and tell you that they're God's little honey in so many words, and we've seen a few of those stars fall out of heaven. Well, then there's another occasion that there was a French nobleman. He tried to confound Nostradamus' prophetic power, and this back in his age in the 1500s, he asked him to predict the fate of two of his suckling pigs he had in the yard, and the answer was that the nobleman, he would eat the black one, and a wolf the white one. The nobleman instantly ordered the white one to be killed for dinner that night, and when dining later with Nostradamus, he was amazed when told that a tame wolf cub had carried off the meat of the white pig, and that he was, after all, eating the black one. And so I guess he left his Judaism behind when he became a Catholic. It was all right to eat pig then. But anyway, before he died in 1566, this prophet, he had a date engraved on a very small metal plate and instructed it was supposed to be put in the coffin with him. And then in the 17th century, this coffin was taken from the grave where it had lain for approximately 130 some years, and they moved it to a more prominent site. The plate was resting on the prophet's skeleton, and it bore the date 1700. So was that just coincidental that his grave was moved? So to avoid being accused of witchcraft by the Inquisition, Nostradamus, he confused the dates of his predictions, and he wrote in a bewildering mixture of anagrams, symbols, and Old French and Latin and other languages. This deliberate confusion had led to some very curious and widely different interpretations of his many prophecies, and so many of his predictions, they were very close to the facts, just enough to satisfy his reputation as people want to use him or make him out to be the greatest European prophet that Europe ever produced. Well, that's fine if they want to do that. But there are great many similarities and things that we might have a little trouble denying. But a little more on Hitler. Nostradamus, he produced several extraordinary predictions that seem to be very accurate, and they all seem to pertain to this German leader. And one verse sums up Hitler's life, and supposedly they used to say it predicts the fact that his death in Berlin in 1945 would never be satisfactorily confirmed. Because, and please don't write to me about it. I don't have the time now, nor do I want to get into it. But I don't believe that that was Hitler's body that they found. I really just don't believe that. And one of these days, hopefully, I can get out a tape on that, what I really feel happened to him. But to quote, if I may, Nostradamus tape, it says, "Near the Rhine, from the Austrian mountains, will be born a great man of the people, and come too late, a man who will defend Poland and Hungary, and whose fate will never be certain." Now, another verse that described the early years of the Second World War, when the great German armies, they swept across the Rhine into France, and most of Europe, as you remember, they were allied with him in the greater part of the battlefield. Hitler or Heister was for a time only too successful. And the poem went on to say, "Beasts wild with hunger will cross the rivers. The great part of the battlefield will be against Heister." Now this prophet, he warned of weapons heard in the skies and the machines of flying fire, referring, people believe, to aircrafts and bombings and strafings, and especially they tried to say that he was warning of the what they call them, V2 or rockets. And they say that, well, he claimed that this Heister, or this Hitler, that he would be one of the second Antichrist. Now, Nostradamus, he vividly described what a wartime pilot would look like in an oxygen mask. Hear what I was just saying about the wild beasts and so forth. He claimed that Nostradamus, he described what back in the Second World War, you've seen those old movies of the pilots flying those German aircraft up high, in ours also, what would look like an oxygen mask and helmet and goggles. Went on to say, half pig, half man, when battles are fought in the sky. And all of this was laid on to Hitler. He made some back prophecies that they predicted that were closer to his time, like Henry II of France. And they said that it came terribly true that one of the French court mentioned Nostradamus' prediction of how King Henry would die. And his poem went like this: "The young lion will overcome the elder in a field of battle in a single fight. He will pierce his eyes in the golden cage. 2 wounds in one, then dies a cruel death." Now this, they laid to this poem. It was fulfilled 4 years later in 1559, when Henry, one of the heraldic emblems, was a lion. And he had a friendly joust with a young officer named Montgomery. Now, he was the captain of the French King's Scottish Guard, and Montgomery's, what they called a lance, it pierced the visor of Henry's gilt helmet. It wounded him in the eye and the throat, and the king died terrible death after, I think, 10 or 12 days of agony. And so Nostradamus, he successfully he made a prediction that was particularly cruel blow there for Henry's widow, Catherine de Medici, let's see, how do you pronounce that? Medici, I'm sorry. Medici, I believe is the way it was spelled. And but she believed in the prophet implicitly, and she became one of his patrons. And in gratitude, Nostradamus, he at once he started to create this vision of all of France's future monarchs in the mirror at the palace. And there was probably trick that used reflections of accomplices. I mean, he was quite a huckster. He was a real shyster in adjoining rooms. But this superstitious Catherine, she was super impressed with this great prophet, and with his prospects guaranteed. This guy, he used them to his advantage. When they were insured here, we found that Nostradamus, he was able to carry on with his serious work of foretelling future events for all mankind on such a grand scale. I mean, it's just like it is today. You know, you see all of these people on the glass toilet, as I call it, you know, write in for your psychic readings and get somebody with the tarot cards that are going to tell you your future. And I think the Bible talks about the great man Saul going to the witch of Endor and all. And personally, I stay away from a lot of these people. And then also we had, there was another, let's see, Louis the 16th, Louis the 16th, and Marie Antoinette, to Varnes, France in 1791, graphically described in these words: "By night will come through the forest of Rheims, two partners by roundabout way, the queen, the white stone, the monk king dressed in gray at Varnes. The elected caput causes tempest, fire, and bloody slicing." So we find that you go back and you check the history that this royal couple, they fled by night through the forest, having escaped the queen's apartments. They lost their way and chose a very bad route, shall we say. And the white stone is thought supposedly to refer to the diamond necklace affair that ruined the queen's reputation. And she was also in the habit of wearing white dresses. We find the monk king could be an allusion to the king's one-time impotence. And it was known at the time of his capture he was wearing gray clothes. Now we're speaking of the flight of this poor Louis the 16th and Marie Antoinette as they were fleeing to France. He was a member of the what they call the Capet Royal line, and though he's not directly responsible for the guillotine executions, bloody slicings, as from the prosody in the poem there, he was the cause of the revolution and the terror that followed. And so apparently this prophet did see the details of his arrest and execution and so forth, and also they gave him credit for Napoleon. They said that he was to see the rise of Napoleon, and he was described as the first Antichrist, like Hitler was to be the second, and he spoke of a third yet to appear. And he spoke of Napoleon's rise to power as emperor. He wrote, "An emperor will be born near Italy, who will cost the empire dearly." Now, to say the least, Napoleon cost France dearly, not only in manpower, but political strength, because you realize that Napoleon was a communist, and he rose from corporal through the ranks, and actually he changed his ideas and literally changed sides with a lot of these political merchants and all that were selling him out. But Nostradamus, he supposedly made the prediction of Napoleon's fate when he went on, and they give this poem of credit to him. The great empire will soon be exchanged for a small place, which will soon begin to grow, a small place of tiny arena, in the middle of which he will come to lay down his scepter. Now you and I, I imagine, at least when I was a kid, we were taught in school that he was exiled to a very small island that was called Elba. But he escaped for 100 days, and then he relinquished all power for exile in the tiny St. Helena. So there's a lot of people that give credit that Nostradamus, he spoke of the great fire and the plague. Now the only thing that bothers me, he never gave any exact or precise dates, but they believe that he spoke of the great fire of London. Was an exception. He wrote very precise when he wrote on this. The blood of the just will be damned of London, burnt by fire, and 3 times 20 plus 6. The disaster occurred. Now get the number of the so-called Antichrist, if you like. But actually, people for centuries have misquoted it. It was a mysterious number. It means a mystery number of a mystery man, or a mysterious kind of a man. But anyway, the disaster here that we're speaking of, the Great Fire and the Plague of London, it occurred in 1666, and Nostradamus, he appointed the Italian habit of leaving out the first 2 digits in the date. This is how he prophesied the Great Plague that ravished London in 1665. Retribution, he suggested, for the murder of Charles I. Now, the great plague of that maritime city shall cause till death is avenged by the blood of the just, taken and condemned through innocence. The great Dane, outraged by fringing saints. Now, the fringing saints appear to be, or appeared to represent, shall we say, the Puritans, and the Great Dame is suggested, or was thought to be St. Paul's Cathedral, which was destroyed in the fire. And they also, spoke of, he prophesied of good old England's King Charles I. Remember, he was executed in 1649 by the hands of what they called at that time the Roundheads. Nostradamus, one of his many predictions, pertained to Great Britain. It supposedly, its comprehension covers Charles, Archibald, Laud, and Cromwell. Well, the unworthy man is chased from the English kingdom. The counselor, through anger, will be burnt. His followers will stoop to such a depth that the pretenders will almost be received. Now, Charles' responsibility, or irresponsibility, I should say, that was what caused him to lose his kingdom. Now, he had a counselor, was this Archibald Laud, who was burnt in 1645, and the followers who stooped so low were speaking of the Scots who sold the king back to Parliament in 1646. The pretender here was presumably Oliver Cromwell, the Lord Protector of England, from 1653 to 1658, and he was almost accepted as king by the English people. But he was, if I may get down on him, let's see, he was the king that put the sword to the throat of the king at Runnymede. But he was such a self-righteous, sanctimonious hypocrite that he would actually kill any of his men or officers in the battlefield that used vulgarity. And while he went under the guise of being a Christian, in reality he was a Jew. And yet here he's pretending to practice all these Christian ethics, and, well, we'll leave that alone. We'll just stick to the prophecies here. But Nostradamus is most accurate, supposedly, that was regarding Charles was, and the Parliament of London shall put their king to death. He will die because of the shaven heads in council. So everybody has claimed that this prophecy was referring to the Roundheads, their leader Cromwell, who has been described by more than one person like a butcher than any English king. And he was. I really, I think he was a damnable tyrant. to say the least. Now, he supposedly, we have covered prophecies or revelation talking about Hiroshima. So before people get off on how great this Nostradamus is, I want you to know that the Yahshua told John of Revelations, and John, he told of not only Hiroshima but Nagasaki as well. But a lot of people, they claim that Nostradamus prophesied of the nuclear bombs that were, as I just said, dropped at 1945, Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And they use this prophecy. It says, and near the border and in 2 cities will be 2 scourges, the like of which have never been seen. Now, to talk about the atomic blasts and the horror that they brought upon the Japanese people, who would argue that nothing in recorded history the last 5,000 years, anything had ever been seen, except like we go back and we talk about the wars of come out of these tablets of ancient Indra. We talk about those things from the Hammurabi and Nagamati and other ancient writings of Mu. But then also he was given credit as he supposedly prophesied about General Franco and the Spanish-American War from 1936-39. They claimed that he named the main leaders of the fascist forces. Let's see, what was it? Primo de Rivera and Franco, who you might remember he later served as dictator of Spain. And the last line refers to Franco's temporary exile when he was not allowed to cross the Mediterranean Sea in order to enter Spain. And so we see that Franco's role in this in the great Spanish Civil War, supposedly predicted by Nostradamus, it supposedly not only referred to him by name, but told of his temporary exile. It said, from Castile, Franco will bring out the assembly. The ambassadors will not agree and cause a schism. The people of Riviera will be in the crowd. Rivera will be in the crowd, and the great man will be denied entry to the Gulf. Now, I don't know, it's pretty hard to get around that one. And he supposedly, they think that he talked about Louis Pasteur, and he prophesied of him, and he predicted, it also gave a name and a date. Pasteur will be celebrated as a godlike figure. This is when the moon completes her great cycle. Now, Pasteur, as you know, he was given credit as a great medical scientist who founded the Pasteur Institute in 1889, and the lunar cycle around the Earth takes about 19 years to complete, and one such cycle was completed in 1889. Now, I think that I shall leave off with the final and the, if you choose to believe it, and I have no reason to doubt it. As I have said on other tapes, I believe that we have proved that we're living in the very hour that from 1967, when Israel was surrounded by Gentiles, meaning nations, and a lot of people thought that this was a prophecy fulfilled when Alan Allenby went in, that officer from England, when they took it from the Turks. But I believe we spent a lot of time proving what a farce that was. And I think that we've proved in other tapes, without going into great depth, that I think that we've shown beyond, from Scripture and other sources. We've even said that the great Aztec calendar and the Mayans, they predicted the year, which would be in our year 2011, that the great eternal God of the universe would come to this planet He would get rid of all evil and etc., and he would clean it up and establish his kingdom here. Now, what could be their God could be your devil, or vice versa. So I'll just leave it to you, whichever side you're on. But I have said that 40 years is a generation. Scripture says so. And I believe from 67 to 2007, we're living in that cycle when he talks about a great light coming from the east to the west, which few people have understood, but we've explained that in other lectures. But let's see what Nostradamus, he says about the final war. He referred to a third world war, and he spoke of when this was to happen, the century it was to happen in. He gave some exact date. He said it was going to happen in the northern hemisphere, and he spoke about true great nations, great powers that would align themselves against the East. And we know that the East, after this fracas we've had over there, we're not too concerned because it wasn't our people, but there was over 500,000 people, predominantly non-combatants, women and children, but they weren't kinfolk to us, so who really cares? I'm being facetious, of course. But, as I've said over and over, this nation better learn about treachery. And the way we have been treacherous to the people of the East. There's a day of recompense coming, the great jihad, as that king said on, or the general there said, don't you ever forget, there's 1 billion Muslims in the world. They're all not here. But let's go back to Nostradamus, when he prophesied the great war that was to take place in the northern hemisphere, and he spoke of two great powers that were going to align themselves against the East. I'll say that's where it's going to start. And he said, when those of the northern pole are united together, in the East will be great fear and dread. One day the two great leaders will be friends, and the great power will be seen to grow. The new land will be at the height of its power. To the man of blood the number is reported. Now we have to go back and see just exactly what was he talking about when he spoke of man of blood, and how do we identify him? And we find that elsewhere he identified him as being the world's third Antichrist, who was to emerge in Asia, the new land, as a common term that was used by our prophet here, Nostradamus. He used it when he was to refer to what is now called America. Thus, Nostradamus, he seemed to suggest that this Third World War will occur between China, Russia, and the American alliance. And I believe he's right, and I believe when he's talking about the northern pole, as Ezekiel spoke of it, that says they went up over the north, they went over the top. In other words, Russia, they went through Alaska, they come down what a lot of people not realize the taxpayers of America paid for, what was termed years ago by many people Treason Highway, through Alaska and Canada right into the fruit basket of the world, California, to the great San Joaquin Valley, and which will lead to the breadbasket of the United States, to the Mississippi Valley. We shall be invaded at the same time from Mexico and from Cuba, a nation that is on the verge of starvation. And so I believe the prophet, he went on, he gave a precise date from all this conflict that he quoted in his poem. He said, when the cycle of the centuries renewed, Nostradamus, he wrote the following: in the year 1999, and 7 months from the sky, will come the great king of terror. Now, that leaves me to wondering. From the sky will come the great king of terror. Now, a lot of people think, oh my God, that's the Antichrist. But what? The scripture says, every eye shall see him. Every eye shall see him. Let's talk about all over the world. And Washington spoke of the great light coming from heaven, and that's going to be a terror to his adversaries. And the scripture says, and those who pierced him shall see him. Well, there's a lot of heavy-duty things to consider, so I believe that we will conclude our prophecy on this tape, and we'll start some more. We'll get back to the American prophets on the next tape and try not to have them interrupted. There's nothing as bad to me as leaving off on a story and then later on pick it up and say, oh God, I got to go back and play the other tape. Where was I? But if you lose any of your tapes, or if we send you out a bad one, just write to us, send the tape back, and we'll get you another one. Write Pilgrim Ships, P.O. Box 1086, Lakeview, Missouri, 65737. We thank you so much for listening. Let us hear from you.